Please join me in welcoming Representatives-elect Cecil Bell Jr., Giovanni Capriglione, and Mary Gonzalez. Sir, again, thank you so much. Put you right there. Again, thank you so much. Ma'am, thank you very much. Good to see you. Put you there. Welcome. I can't imagine at $600 a month why any of you would want this job, but let's spend a little bit of time talking about that. I'm interested really in what motivated you to run. You know, serving in the state legislature these days, like serving in Congress, is not enormously popular. The approval ratings of our members not very high. So obviously you go into this with a challenge to persuade people that the work you do matters. Mr. Bell, I'm wondering why you decided to run. This is a new district.
It is a new district,
yeah.
Obviously, with Montgomery County's population growing and
right.
the area growing, we benefited from that by having a new seat.
Right.
It's my belief that you're supposed to have representation, and so with the seat moving there, I wanted to be certain that whoever was elected to that seat, in this case it was myself,
yeah.
Offered that representation and had in mind those things which were able to be certain that in the future the Texas that we see is a Texas we recognize, where we still have the opportunities and
yep.
our kids have those opportunities and future generations have the opportunities for greatness as Texans and as Americans.
Was there a particular issue that was on your mind when you made the decision to run?
The particular issue on my mind was being certain that my kids and yours were going to be able to enjoy the free enterprise system and the liberties and freedoms that should be inherent to being a citizen here.
Got it.
That's it.
Got it. Mr. Capriglione, you had run once before against
right.
Ms. Truitt and were unsuccessful, was successful the second time around. Obviously, you'd thought a lot about this. So
sure.
Why did you decide to run?
Well, I mean, for me, the ability to serve the great state of Texas and the residents of my district is an honor second to none. When I first started to get super involved in politics was, quite frankly, right around the time Barack Obama was elected. And I started to watch the federal deficit just increase from 10 to 11 to 12 to $16 trillion. With 3 daughters, it worries me what we're headed towards. And so for me, it was a big fiscal concern. Is the reason why I started getting involved.
Big fiscal concerns.
Yes.
Got it. Now, you were supported by many of the Tea Party groups. Right. As a Tea Party member, or as an incoming member who had been supported by the Tea Party, were the politics of that district of particular interest or concern to you? Obviously, you took on a longtime Republican sure. incumbent. Can you talk about the political calculation as well as the substantive reason for running?
Well, I think in that district it is. It's a very conservative district.
Yeah.
It's the most Republican district and the most Republican county in the state of Texas. And I felt that the person that had been representing us was not doing that in a conservative manner, consistent with how the constituents felt.
Right.
And so I really went through a campaign of going door to door, listening to people, a grassroots campaign.
Right.
Through that process, I just figured that I was someone that represented the citizens on that level.
Yeah, you're more in line with what the district's
yeah, absolutely.
ideological view of the world is. Now, Ms. Gonzalez, like Mr. Capriglione, you're replacing a longtime incumbent. Yours left voluntarily.
Yes.
And obviously El Paso is more heavily Democratic than anything else, so probably the primary was going to be the deciding factor. Of course, no general election opponent. What made you decide to run in this case?
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
You know, I used to be involved in politics. As you mentioned, I used to work at the House, and
right.
I really always believed that politics was a way to make people's lives better.
Yeah.
But I left politics to be a professor, to be in academia.
Right.
2 years ago, I was sitting in one of my graduate courses, and my professor walks in, and he's really upset, and he said, "It's the end of public school as we know it." And it's a really dramatic statement for me to be sitting in a class, really believing in education as a future for our state and for our country, and for it to be really dismantled last legislative session.
He was referring to the cuts to public education that came out of the last budget.
The cuts to public education, the implementation of the STAR test, what was happening with the curriculum and SBOE, all of these things that were happening that were dramatically changing public ed.
Yeah.
And so I had always told my students that if we wanted to see any social change or any change at all, that we had to be the agents of that change. And so I can tell my students one thing and not do it, but I wanted to be a woman of my word. And so I I decided to put my career on hold as an academic to run for office to really advocate for public education.
Take the leap yourself. You also knew that probably being a college professor is the only thing less popular than being a member of the state legislature.
I was a really popular college professor. Right? I don't know what you're talking about.
Now, Mr. Capriglione, what Ms. Gonzalez is referring to, of course, is those public ed cuts, again, depending upon how you calculate them, $4 billion or $5.4 billion in cuts, either way historic. That was the big headline coming out of the last session. Ms. Gonzalez says, and I'm assuming you agree with that statement, the end of public education as we know it, or something heading us in that direction. Mr. Capriglione, do you believe that we're in as dire a situation on education issues as Ms. Gonzalez does?
Well, as you mentioned when we first started, I'm involved in the Carroll Education Foundation on Finance and Budget Committee. I have 3 children myself in public school. Yeah. So it is a strong concern for me.
You have a parent's perspective among others.
I have a parent's perspective. I live in a district where education is a focus for a lot of people, a lot of the reason why people move to our district. So I am concerned about public education, but I also realized that in the last session there was budget issues. There were significant budget issues, not just in Texas State, but all over the United States. And you know, I would like to see us go and focus on education in this next thing, given that there's some lawsuits going on and we'll have to work on public finance. But when we look at what we can do, I think it will be a priority.
Are you thinking, Mr. Capriglione, we might want to go back and put some money back into public education, some of that money that was cut last time?
Well, I think when you look at, I think what we need to do is look at each school district independently. I'd like to focus on local control, finding ways that local money can stay inside of the local district. You know, my school districts, a lot of them are Robin Hood districts, and so, you know, for us, it's kind of tragic in a way that we're all contributing a significant amount of property taxes to go towards our school district, but so far about...
And yet that money leaves.
That money leaves, almost $750 million since the Robin Hood program started. And we are faced with budget cuts, and so that seems a little unfair. Right.
Now, Mr. Bell, what one hears about you, because you come with advanced billing, is he really does understand education. You know, having spent time working on education issues in Magnolia and in the surrounding communities, he's going to come in and he's going to be a player immediately on this. So I'm counting on you to square the difference here, to tell us the truth about where we are on public ed and what we can expect in the next session.
Well, I don't know about the squaring the deal, but I will tell you that I think that it's important for us to realize that it's not all about how much money is in public education.
It's not just spending on
It's not
on
just
public
about
ed.
spending. A lot of it has to do with the fact that our students are challenged by what we're offering them. And when you look at kids today, and you talk to them, especially those who are challenged dropouts or who have truancy issues, it's about relevancy in learning. And so I think if we want to address our public education system, one of the things we have to do is address relevancy in learning.
Talk a little bit more about that, what you mean by that.
Well, what I mean by that is that if you look at students who want the information that's being offered, then there's a retention and ownership in that. Which then allows you to push the academic standards up and to offer more distinguished opportunities, which then ultimately lets us have solutions to societal issues and to the issue of retaining our own prosperity as Texans. But to get relevancy, we have to be offering courses that are in line with what our students want. And I think when we look at budget issues and the tightness that existed in the last session, some of which it doesn't have the same constraints on it, but unless we can come up with a way of getting our kids to be able to retain the education we're offering, to be able to then go to college or go to work without the need for remediation, again, it's not all about dollars. And so what I think we have to do is we have to find a way to open the door for career and technology to be broadened, and we have to have an understanding that career and technology is not all about blue-collar jobs. It's also about white-collar opportunities. Right. And I think
there's no one good path. There's a lot of paths.
Well, and to simplify it, in Texas, we have a recommended path, which is the 4x4 today. Setting beside that is a traditional career and technology program, which has basically got to a point at this time in history where your choices are be a cosmetologist, a mechanic, or a welder. And then we have our distinguished graduation plan, which lets our kids, most people don't know this, but you can graduate with an associate's degree at the same time or shortly before you graduate with your high school diploma. The strength of that program is our community colleges.
Yep.
The interface already exists between public education and our community colleges. And then within the community colleges, there are two distinct disciplines. The standard academia that we take advantage of today, but there's this wealth of career and technology. And if we're looking for ways to address the fiscal constraints that we need to be concerned about and that relevancy and ownership, then we need to look at broadening that relationship that exists. We see an expansion of career and technology in some areas like Temple, which have the dollars available to do that. I don't think we as a state are going to be able to model the rest of the school districts in Texas after that. So we need to look at where that relationship already exists and how to take advantage of the resources we've already expanded. We've expanded community colleges. They do a great job. We already have the interface. We don't need any new bureaucracy. We don't need any new facilities. Just a better working relationship between the assets that we have there so that our kids benefit.
Good. Ms. Gonzalez, do you think our schools are failing in this state? Are we doing an adequate job of educating our public school kids?
You know, I grew up through the public school system, and I'm very proud of our public schools, but I do think that we have to continue to advance our public schools. I think that we have to restore the cuts to education. I think that we have to account for enrollment growth. I think that we have to continue to implement a curriculum that I think, you know, part of what you said is correct. We need to have curriculum that helps students retain information and is really engages them in the production and creation of knowledge, right? I think that a lot of times when we have this test, it dehumanizes students to only learn to a test.
You're referring to the standardized testing, the accountability.
Yeah, to the STAR test. And so, you know, if you ask teachers across the state, I don't think any teachers like that test. And so how does it really impact our classroom and thus impact our students?
Well, neither do a lot of school boards. You may know Mr. Bell, you've been president of the Magnolia ISD trustees. I think more than 80% of school boards have passed a resolution opposing the STAR test, representing more than 80% of the students in the state. You are for or against the standardized testing that we now have in place?
I am opposed to the standardized testing the way it sets today. I am a believer that we need to have mastery of curriculum. Right. Demonstrated mastery.
So you're opposed, Ms. Gonzalez, you're opposed as well?
The way it is right now.
The way it sets today.
Yes.
Mr. Capriglione?
Like I said, I have daughters in 3rd grade and 2nd grade, and I've gone through and I've looked at the curriculum and what they're testing for, and I don't like the way that it's being done.
So we have 3 people opposed to the well, that's 3. Okay.
I think there might be a lot of different, the devil's in details. But
well, what that means may differ.
Well, right. I mean, obviously, how you define standardized testing, just in the same way how you define school choice. An issue I want to ask you about, Mr. Capriglione. You know, we have a new chair of public education in the Senate, Dan Patrick. We don't yet have a new chair of public ed in the House. We will at some point here in the next couple of weeks. But the Senate chair, Mr. Patrick, has made no secret of his intention to push a school choice a plan, whatever that is. In fact, he declined to say a couple of weeks ago. He said, I'll talk about it when I've got the details filled in. Lieutenant Governor has said he's generally speaking for school choice or vouchers. We know the governor is as well. How do you feel about the need for school choice as it relates to your district?
I am in favor of school choice in general, and I'm glad you mentioned in district, because we might have to come up with a solution that's different in each area.
Yeah, Mr. Bell's district, for instance, in your district, may have very different points of view on what's good for those kids. Yeah.
For me, I think, you know, what we want to do ultimately is promote a quality education, and we can do that by promoting parental responsibilities, supporting parental rights, make sure that, again, we focus on local control. I haven't seen, there isn't necessarily a voucher bill, but...
Well, there's no legislation.
There's no legislation, but I'll tell you, whatever it is, I'd be making sure that, one, that there's accountability to the taxpayers, but at the same time also being able to protect private schools and homeschooling from excessive regulation.
Right. Now, you know, Mr. Capriglione, one of the concerns people express about a school choice plan in a broad sense is that these are public tax dollars that are being essentially moved out of the public education system. What about that?
Well, in general, I'm not in favor of taking public dollars and giving it to private individuals, especially without some of the ideas, which is with no accountability whatsoever. But, you know, there is this concept of tax credits, which I think could be used, which would basically be used to say, okay, listen, if you have an abatement on your property taxes, if you have school kids, but if you go to public schools, then you don't receive that education. And but that's going to be an issue, because then what will happen is people will want to regulate where those dollars go, and they should. And how much we're going to do that, I think, is a concern.
You're not a big fan of regulation.
No.
I get the impression pretty quickly. Now, Mr. Bell, you're from a more rural district, and it is often said that rural Republicans may find rare common ground with Democrats on the school choice issue. And this may be the problem for advocates of school choice, is that the rurals and the Democrats may come together to prevent such a plan. How do you feel about it as it relates to your district?
You know, I think the first thing you have to get around is the question of the fact that we as Texans have a constitutional requirement to fund public education. And in the district, I think the biggest challenge that you find within the public school system is not so much is there a willingness to have the conversation. It's more on the private side where they want to have the conversation without having the obligations that go along to the public side.
Sort of to Mr. Capriglione's point, you know, the question of what are the private schools obligated to do that the public schools are obligated to do?
So, you know, if several of the superintendents in the district have made the statement that, you know, while they're not, while they feel like it's probably detrimental, if everybody has to play on a level playing field,
then maybe they'd entertain it.
Then it changes the nature of the game. But if I'm in a private school, if I'm sending my kids, by the way, went to public school.
Yeah.
But if I'm sending my kids to a private school, I'm sending them because of the uniquenesses that the private sector has to offer in terms of curriculum and other aspects. So,
well, Mr. Capriglione walks in disposed in favor of school choice without knowing the details. You walk in opposed or in favor of, without knowing the details.
I am. The way I've heard it, I would be opposed to the system the way I've heard it. But certainly I am, much more conversation has to be had.
You're going to keep an open mind.
I think my district wants me to keep an open mind.
Right.
So.
Ms. Gonzalez, when Senator Patrick was here, I asked him not only about the school choice plan, but about the challenges that the Republican Party will have with the Latino vote following the November 6th elections, about which we've heard a great deal. One of the things he said was one of the ways that we appeal to Hispanics is to give them opportunities as a party through the legislation we put forward, and he actually cited school choice. He said, you know, there were a lot of failing schools in heavily Latino neighborhoods and communities around the state of Texas, and isn't it appropriate for us to give opportunities to those same families, the opportunities that wealthier families in other communities might have. Now, in El Paso, there are good schools and there are bad schools like there's every place, but it's obviously a heavily Latino community. Isn't Senator Patrick right that the families in your district would like to have more opportunities than they have if their schools aren't succeeding?
Well, I think what I love about the Latino community is we have a community, right? It's about all of us helping each other and supporting each other. What school choice does is say we're going to pick one or two students to have the access to different types of education, not all the students. Right now, when we're funneling money out of education, we should be putting more money into education.
So rather than have school choice, you would just want to put that money into fixing the failing schools.
Public schools so we can all the students can benefit, not just a select few. And for my district, it doesn't make any sense. I live in the more rural part of El Paso, so there are no private schools in my district. Students would
as a practical matter.
As a practical matter. So my district, those students would have to drive into the city, and there's no transportation. At this point, not only does it not make sense for my district, but I don't think it makes sense for the Latino community.
So you walk in disposed not to support such a thing.
Yes.
Let me pivot to health care. Governor Perry, our governor, you've all heard of him, has an opinion piece in USA Today explaining his opposition to both state insurance exchanges and the federal expansion of Medicaid. He has, it's now become the cliche in politics, doubled down on his opposition to federal health reform, despite the fact that we know it's both constitutional and, given the election results, is unlikely to be repealed. Each of you is going to go in and have to deal with a lot of legislation in the House that relates to health care. I'm wondering where each of you feels we ought to be as a state with regard to federal health reform, given the election results and given the likelihood of the Affordable Care Act remaining in place. Mr. Capriglione, I suspect you oppose it.
Right, I
Yes.
do. I do oppose it. I think Governor Rick Perry is exactly right when it comes to this. We as legislators we have fiduciary responsibility to taxpayers. I'm in venture capital, private equity, and the way I look at it is a businessman coming up saying, hey, Giovanni, would you invest in my company? We have this customer that wants us to radically increase our expenses and promises to pay us less and less each time. And when I ask him about that customer, he'll say, well, it's nearing bankruptcy and it's run by a dysfunctional management team. I'm not likely to invest in that scheme. And in that same way, I think it would be wrong of Texas to sign up for this at this time.
Because you think the government is not capable of providing quality or efficient delivery of those services.
The federal government is not, no.
Mr. Capriglione, you know, because I know you pay attention to these things, that we now have $5.8 million uninsured Texans, according to the U.S. Census, 23% of our population, more uninsured citizens as a percentage of our population than any other state. I now know what you're opposed to. Tell me what you're for.
Sure, and I do pay attention to that stuff, and I've looked at the 2010 census, and when you really dig down into those numbers, what you'll see is that, of course, Texas has a more diverse population than other states. In fact, if you net out people here illegally, illegal immigrants who are here, and they're higher uninsured, they're about 62, 65% uninsured. If you net that out, that alone gets rid of half the delta between Texas and the national average. If you look at the 7 states that are on that list of the highest uninsured, 6 of them have the highest amount of illegal immigration in there. Texas has a lot of different industries, but our industry mix is such that we have a high agriculture, which has temporary jobs, service, retail, and that sort of thing. What I'm for is that I do think that we can go and make changes in how the government invests. For instance, there's this concept called tax credits, and it's something that I think will come up in the next legislative session. And what it does is allows people to go and invest in low-income, moderate areas using a combination of tax credits as well as private dollars. Myself personally, I've invested with my funds, not with my own money, but I invested funds in clinics in San Antonio and a hospital. And there's a way to be able to go and combine those two things and say, hey, listen, we're going to provide you a lower than standard market rate for this loan or for this investment. Right. But in that process, you're going to have to do a couple of things. And for instance, what I had added in one is said, okay, you have to go and provide a clinic that has a sliding scale. You have to go and have a certain number of students come in each year on a field trip to learn about the eye, and then they'll get a free eye exam after it. So I think there are things that
these are markets, but these are market solutions.
There are some, yeah, absolutely, market solutions.
And you think the market can adequately provide?
As long as there's a profit to be made, the market will support.
Mr. Bell, what do you think about this question of what the state's obligation should be on health care and its relationship to what's happening in the federal government?
Well, first off, I'm adamantly opposed to whatever you want to call it, Obamacare, which
I think the president's decided that's okay too, so you're not offending him by calling it.
That's right. So, with all due respect to our Supreme Court, it is a very offensive time in history for me to be told that I have to buy a product instead of, which do you buy? Do you buy milk or health insurance? And one you can live without. The other you can't. I know that would be an arguable question, but we do have challenges. I believe the free enterprise system offers us the greatest advantages to being able to deal with those challenges. I think regulation and bureaucracy, to a degree, stand in the way of a functioning system. As far as the governor's stance, the whole process, the way it's set up right now, effectively burdens the state under the pretense that we'll get federal dollars to address the initial portion of that. The further down that road you get, the smaller those dollars get and the bigger that burden becomes. Right. You talked earlier about the public ed demands, $4 to $5 billion. Well, this is a $27 billion conversation.
This is the thing that threatens to eat the entire budget.
It does threaten to eat the entire budget, and so it is certainly something that we've got to take seriously. We've got to address. But I am a believer that the free enterprise system and capitalism
better way to handle it
is a much better way to handle it.
Right, Ms. Gonzalez.
So, what do we know? We know that Texas nearly ranks last when it comes to insured Texans. We know that Obama won the election. We know that this is going to be implemented whether people are comfortable with it or not. And I think that it's I used to always tell my students, these are people's lives we're messing with. There are people who need access to health care. And so whether we want to implement, whether people feel comfortable, it's going to be implemented, whether we do it or the feds come in and do it in 2016, 2018.
Is Mr. Capriglione wrong that the government shows itself often to be unable to provide quality or efficient services, whether it's health care or anything else? Is he wrong about that?
I don't necessarily, I agree with that. I think that the government has proven itself to make the lives of people better if it is really trying to be equitable and fair and really intentionally trying to make people's lives better. So the fact is that we have a healthcare problem. We can either provide people access to health care so they have preventable care, so not going to emergency rooms, so that they have insurance, or we can just pay the bill later, and that's going to cost more at the end of the day. But These are people's lives.
So if you had Governor Perry's ear, your message to him would be take the opportunity to expand Medicaid.
Well, these are our tax dollars that are already going to the federal government. In essence, we're saying we don't want our tax money coming back to Texas. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It's a political tool, you know, that's used instead of thinking about people's lives.
Right. Mr. Bell, pardon me. We have a massive problem with water in the state.
Yes, sir.
We've just come out of the worst one-year drought in the history of Texas. We thought that things were getting better the last couple of months. We're now hearing that maybe things are beginning to get a little bit worse again. You actually, unlike a lot of people who are going to enter the legislature whose only experience with water is drinking it, you've actually been in business and you understand water as a business issue and as a manufacturing issue almost, right? You know, you've done, as a construction issue, you've actually done projects. What are we going to do? We have a $53 billion completely unfunded state water plan, and yet the problem is not going to go on pause while we figure out the solution. The problem is going to continue to get worse. What should we do? And what are you thinking you'd like to do going into the session?
Well, there are some things we can do. We can look at making certain that that the areas which are already in attainment areas, which have features in place to maximize our storage capacity in our existing reservoirs, are accomplishing their charge, which is to reduce the amount of soil that's being deposited. Lake Houston, for example, has about 80% of its capacity. It's lost about 20% because of silt and sediment that comes down. And we have in place over time the features to prevent that from being the case, but we're not meeting our attainment requirements.
So there's more that we can do now without building a bunch of new reservoirs.
Without doing more.
Right.
We do need to figure out a way to address it. I think reservoirs is a huge conversation because it deals with private property rights and other issues. That it just gets bigger the more you talk about it.
Right.
We've got to figure out how to fund the water plan, and we've got to figure out how to address water. But to me, the immediate things that come to mind are figuring out how to use the capacity that we have in place.
Now.
How to conserve where we can conserve, where surface water initiatives are in place to be certain that we maintain the pool level or the surface level of the water that's there, like in Lake Conroe.
Right.
And I think what we need to look at is we need to look at private sector investment. Water is a huge conversation. It's a huge opportunity. The private sector, where there is legitimate opportunity, tends to bring dollars to the table. And I think
so this will be one of those
exception
public-private partnerships. That's ultimately what's going to.
I believe it's a great opportunity for that.
Mr. Capriglione, whatever portion of the water plan or any of these other issues that we have to put our hands in our pockets and fund, we obviously have limited dollars. We did last session. We may be a little bit better off this session in terms of the budget. The governor has put a flag down on the ground. He said no new taxes, no increases on existing taxes, no fees, no accounting tricks. This is going to be a session in which the conversation is not we don't have enough revenue, we have too much spending. Again, I'm going to take a wild guess and assume that you agree with that.
Sure, I do, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I think we do have to use this opportunity, since the budget may be somewhat better than it was last time, use this as an opportunity to fix some of the things that we have to, which includes fund diversions, okay?
Yeah, fund diversions.
Fund diversions, leadership has already talked about maybe taking that back somewhat, and I'm all in favor of that, and that'll help, I think, get us back to where we need to be, which is 2 or 3 years ago. It also includes things like the accounting gimmicks, if you will, getting our funds back to where they were. I think those are priorities. Make sure we have a rainy day fund that has that's balanced.
So you're opposed to accounting gimmicks?
I'm opposed, yeah, especially, yeah.
So if you had been in the legislature last time and the legislature had discussed kicking about $5 billion in Medicaid costs into the next session, with the understanding that they would pass a supplemental appropriations bill looking back at the cost they've already incurred over their shoulder, you would have voted no.
That's right. You know, if you look at it, that's like saying I have a balanced budget, I just haven't paid my car this month.
Yes.
So the next month you have to.
But of course, Mr. Capriglione, it's been ever thus in the legislature. Those kinds of accounting tricks are pretty much par for the course.
Sure. And again, I think that we have a new legislature coming in. We have 43, 45 new members coming in. We have about 25 new sophomores. I think what you're going to see is a very conservative young freshman group going in.
Right.
And you know, I have a finance background. I've met a lot of the other freshmen, also have a lot of experience in business and so on.
Yeah.
We want to try and put some of that business acumen into the way this is run.
No taxes, no tax increases in the next session?
No, absolutely
Mr.
not.
Bell, no taxes, no tax increases in the next session?
I hate boxes.
It's a yes or no question, Mr. Bell.
I follow that.
Surely I'm not going to be the only person to put you on the spot. So.
At this time, I see no reason that we have to have new taxes.
The headline of this will be Bell leaves wiggle room on taxes. At this time, you see no reason.
I'm opposed to increasing taxes.
Okay. Ms. Gonzalez, will you consider it?
Of course. I'll consider anything to restore the cuts to public education, to take care of the bills that we have to pay for Medicaid. I'm not saying it's the first step I would go. I think that we have to do other things, but at this point, I'm really open to anything that will invest in Texas.
You're not
future.
foreclosing.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Last question before we open it up for questions from the audience. I know we'll have a robust Q&A portion with the audience here. You may have heard there's a speaker's race.
Really?
Yes. In fact, I think each of the three of you may have dodged the phone calls that my reporters made to your offices, but you cannot do that today. We have Mr. Hughes, who was actually up on the stage last Thursday, who is a very nice man from Mineola, who is intending to challenge the speaker, believes that there are process issues that would make him a better speaker than the existing speaker. Speaker Strauss has said this weekend on WFAA, I have enough votes to become speaker again, the race is over, but has failed so far to produce a list, and in the absence of a list, none of us believe that he actually has the votes, or can't believe it until we actually see them. So I'm going to ask each of you, please, Ms. Gonzalez first. There are many Democrats who supported the speaker in the last session. One of your colleagues, incoming colleagues, Mr. Martinez-Fisher from San Antonio, thinks that the speaker has not done a good enough job in giving Democrats the concessions that they would need to vote for him again. He wants to wait and see what the speaker does. But there are other Democrats who say we have the best deal that we're going to get. He is, in effect, the Democratic speaker that we've been waiting for. We're not going to get a better deal. So what do you think about the speaker's race?
Well, I haven't made a decision. I'm taking my time. I don't want to rush such an important decision. But I left my job to run for office because I wasn't happy with what happened last legislative session. Yeah. And he was a speaker. And so I think that there are some serious questions that do need to be asked.
You going to get a better deal from Mr. Hughes?
I don't know if the conversation is about a deal, but I think it's about what is any speaker candidate really trying to do next legislative session for the people and not play political games.
Right. So you're going to wait and see. What is it that you're waiting to hear before you decide?
Just priorities and really what they feel went wrong last session and what they want to do this session.
Okay. Mr. Capriglione, a lot of people would assume, given your background and given your ideological provenance, that you're a slam dunk vote for Brian Hughes.
First, for the record, I did respond to the Texas Tribune
I did
deal.
too.
Yeah.
And so, but what you said was haven't decided.
Well, we haven't decided.
No, that's it. That's
technically a response, but you know, Mr. Capriglione.
But technically, what I'd say is I think there needs to be another column. One of the things that
Okay, what was the new column?
The new column should be that's going to hold a town hall meeting to listen to their constituents in terms of get input.
Right. In other words, not decided.
But
no, I think it's good. You're asking your constituents. Okay. That's fine.
One of the things that I did I went door to door. It took me about 6 months, going door to door almost every single day. I went to 6,850 homes in that process. And I got the chance to talk to a lot of people in my district. But the speaker's race, quite frankly, wasn't one that came up. It's when you show up at someone's door.
I'm shocked to discover that the speaker's race didn't come up.
Because those are the other concerns.
I'm not even sure everybody in this room cares about the speaker's race.
Right. I am scheduled to have a town hall meeting on December 6th as part of the Republican Party of Texas platform. Yeah. And there's a 4-step process that's listed on there, and that's what I'll be following. So I am going to wait.
You still hold open the possibility of voting for the speaker?
I'm going to wait absolutely for the input from my constituents.
Mr. Bell.
I have not made any commitment to anyone. I do believe that if you look at conservative agendas, as an incoming freshman, the challenge I have in trying to evaluate the effect of a speaker is I can only look at past history and then an individual and try to determine if that individual or individuals offer a better possibility of a more conservative agenda going forward in the House, so what I've told my constituents and what my constituents have suggested is our need is we want the most conservative person in that seat who can lead in governance. And so
Yeah.
it is.
Again, keeping your mind open for now.
Keeping my mind open.
And you don't foreclose on the possibility of voting for either one?
No. So.
Okay. Remarkable unanimity in their perspective. and I failed to pin them down. You're very nice to be here. We could spend a lot more time talking, but let's bring the audience in. For now, please give a big hand to our new members, Representative Bell, Capriglione, and Gonzalez. Thank you very much.